He thought he was just running late for an appointment. But stopping in the rain to help a German old woman may have cost him more than his schedule. What he didn't know was that her true identity would change his life forever. Hello, if you're ready for the full story, make sure you hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another story that will blow your mind. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. Rain was falling in silver sheets over Munich, turning the wide boulevard into a mirror of umbrellas and headlights. Shoppers hurried along, heads bent, shoes splashing in puddles, each person desperate to reach their destination before the storm grew heavier. Nathan Caldwell adjusted the strap of his worn leather backpack and cursed under his breath. His shirt, brick red and still damp from the earlier drizzle, clung to his shoulders, and his sneakers were already soaked through. He had tried running, weaving between strangers, but the rain only slowed him down. He glanced at his watch. 9:47 a.m. too late. He was supposed to be across town already, sitting in a cafe where a man had promised to meet him with an opportunity. Something vague but important. A chance to finally dig his way out of the rut that had followed him across continents. It wasn't glamorous, but Nathan was 32 and tired of being the guy who never showed up, the one people couldn't count on. He could hear his father's voice in his head, stern, disappointed, American Midwest through and through. You don't follow through, Nathan. You drift. One day, you'll miss the thing that matters most. Nathan tugged his jacket tighter, jaw tense. He wasn't drifting. He was just stuck. That was different. In another part of the city, in an apartment lined with velvet curtains and old stage posters, Elizabeth Hartmann studied her reflection in the mirror. The gown shimmered in shades of champagne and gold as she straightened it with careful hands. She was 78 now, but time had not taken her bearing. Once, she had been the Rose of Dresden, a name that had lit up marquees. Her voice had carried across grand halls, her photographs filled magazines. Now, only a handful of collectors remembered. But today, she had reason to dress. She reached for the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, sliding it into place, her fingers trembling just slightly. She picked up a small, ribbon-bound envelope from the dresser. Inside was something private, something she had guarded longer than most people lived their entire lives. Rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, gathering her strength, and descended to the street. She wasn't supposed to be alone. Her driver had called out sick. And yet, stubborn as ever, she had refused to reschedule. She had borrowed a friend's sports car instead, a gleaming blue machine that looked outrageously out of place in the grey storm. People stared when she stepped from it. Some admired her elegance, some judged her vanity. None of them saw the truth of what weighed inside her heart. Nathan jogged along the boulevard, frustration mounting with every step. If he missed this meeting, he wasn't sure when, or if, there'd be another. 9:58, his pulse spiked. The cafe was at least 15 minutes away. He could maybe catch a tram if he ran. But then he saw her. A woman in a long gown stood by the curb, caught in the downpour. One heel twisted against the slick pavement, sending her stumbling into the open door of the sports car. The hem of her dress dragged in the water. When she tried to steady herself, she faltered again, clutching at the side of the car. Her leg gave way, and Nathan saw the scrape blooming red down her shin. Umbrellas passed by. No one stopped. Some looked briefly, then turned their eyes away. Nathan's steps slowed. He felt the tug of decision like a hand on his collar. He was late. He couldn't afford this. But then the woman's hand hovered in the air, shaking as though reaching for someone who wasn't there. Her face was composed, but her body told the truth, fragile, unsteady, exposed. Nathan's throat tightened. His father's words came back like a hammer. You never step up when it matters. He let out a rough breath, dropped to his knees in the rain, and set his backpack aside. Hold on, ma'am, he said gently, reaching for her elbow. His soaked sneakers squeaked as he steadied himself on the pavement. You're hurt. The woman looked down at him, startled. Her eyes, piercing blue, sharp despite her years, met his. For a moment, she said nothing. Rain streamed down her gown, plastering the fabric against her frame, and yet she held herself like a queen. It is a foolish misstep, she said finally, her German accent faint but distinct. I will be fine. Nathan shook his head. Doesn't look fine to me. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. It was wrinkled but dry enough, and pressed it gently against the scrape on her shin, careful not to hurt her. She hissed softly, but didn't pull away. His hands worked slowly, respectfully, the way one might tend a wound that carried more than just pain. People on the street slowed to watch. Some smiled faintly at the sight. Others frowned, muttering at the delay in traffic. Nathan ignored them all. In the world of umbrellas and rushing feet, only she mattered. You should sit down, he said quietly. Rain's not helping. Elizabeth studied him, her chin tilting slightly, as though she were trying to read the story written across his face. There was no mockery in his tone, no impatience, only a raw kind of sincerity she had not encountered in years. Tell me, young man, she murmured, do you always stop for strangers? Nathan managed a small smile. Not always. But today, I guess it seemed like the right thing to do. He glanced at his watch. 10:06, his chest clenched. The appointment was gone. But as he looked back at the woman before him, regal even with blood trickling down her leg and rain soaking her gown, a strange calm settled over him. Maybe, just maybe, this was the appointment that mattered. Have you ever been forced to choose between your plans and a moment of kindness? Did it change your life? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how fate worked in your favor. Rain hammered against the pavement, blurring the world into streaks of grey and silver. Nathan kept the handkerchief pressed against the old woman's shin, his knees aching on the wet cobblestones. His soaked red shirt clung to his chest, cold and heavy. The wound wasn't terrible, but blood and rain together made it look worse than it was. There, he said softly, pulling back. It's not deep, but you should clean it properly once you're inside. Infection's not something to play with. Elizabeth tilted her chin, studying him with eyes far too sharp for someone her age. You speak like a doctor. Nathan huffed a laugh. Not even close. Just a guy who scraped his knees too many times. He expected her to smile. She didn't. Instead, she slipped her arm into his, testing her weight against him. Help me stand better. He obeyed. She leaned into him more than he thought she would, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so delicate-looking. The contact startled him. Her perfume, faint but unmistakable, carried notes of roses and something darker, like old wood. It was a scent that didn't belong to the present. As she steadied herself against the sports car, Nathan caught his breath and glanced at his watch again. 10:12, his stomach sank. The meeting was gone, his chance squandered. A month of preparation, begging favors, convincing himself he wouldn't screw it up this time. It had all slipped away in the space of 15 minutes. He clenched his jaw. Maybe he could still call. Maybe he could explain. But even as the thought rose, he knew the truth. They wouldn't wait for someone like him. No one ever did. Elizabeth's voice pulled him from his spiral. You missed something, didn't you? Nathan blinked, startled. What? She gave him a look that felt like she could see straight through him. The way you keep staring at that watch. The heaviness in your shoulders. You were on your way to something important. Her words cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Finally, he shrugged. It was just a meeting. Nothing life or death. Then why do you look like you've lost the world? He swallowed hard. She wasn't wrong. For a moment, silence pressed between them, broken only by the hiss of passing cars and the patter of rain. Nathan shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. Most people, especially older folks, dismissed him at first glance. He was used to being underestimated, brushed aside. But this woman was watching him, as though his soul had written itself on his skin. He cleared his throat. Where were you headed? Can I help you get there? Her lips curved faintly, but not in humor. Always turning the question back to someone else. She tapped the envelope she still held in her free hand, tied with its faded ribbon. I was going to deliver this. Nathan frowned. A letter? Yes. A very old one. Her eyes lingered on it, as though it were more precious than gold. Then she slipped it back into her purse and adjusted her shawl. But perhaps I will wait. Rain is not good for paper. Nathan nodded, unsure what to say. Something about the envelope unsettled him. Why carry something so fragile in this storm? Why not wait until tomorrow? A car honked behind them, and Elizabeth glanced up at the crowded street. We are in the way. Come. Nathan hesitated. Where? She gestured toward a cafe across the boulevard, its awning glowing warmly against the grey rain. Shelter. Unless you prefer to drown. He almost laughed at her bluntness. She sounded less like an old woman, and more like a queen issuing orders. Still, his sneakers squished with every step. His shirt clung like a second skin, and he couldn't deny that a cup of coffee sounded like heaven. Fine, he said. But only if I pay. She arched an eyebrow, clearly amused. A gentleman, then. I accept. The cafe was crowded, filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of cups. The windows fogged from the warmth inside, blurring the storm outside. Nathan guided Elizabeth to a corner table, helping her ease into a chair. She sat with the dignity of royalty, every movement deliberate, precise. Nathan ordered 2 coffees, black for him, cappuccino for her, and when the drinks arrived, Elizabeth stirred hers slowly, watching the foam collapse into the dark. You are not German, she said suddenly, her accent thicker now. Nathan shook his head. Chicago. Been here a couple of months. Trying to, I don't know, start fresh, I guess. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. From what? The question was blunt, too blunt. He stiffened, staring into his coffee. Most people didn't ask. Most people didn't want to know. But she waited, unflinching. From myself, he said finally, voice low. From mistakes I couldn't fix. From the person I kept disappointing. Her expression softened, just barely. Then perhaps we are not so different. He looked up, surprised. For a second, the poised, regal mask slipped, and he saw something raw in her gaze. Loneliness. Regret. A story she wasn't ready to tell. What about you? He asked gently. What's with the letter? Her fingers tightened around her cup. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she did, her voice was quiet, almost fragile. It is a piece of my past. Something unfinished. Nathan leaned forward, curiosity sparking. Unfinished how? She shook her head. Another time. And with that, the mask returned. Elizabeth straightened her back, sipped her coffee, and turned the conversation. Tell me, Nathan Caldwell from Chicago, what did you hope to find here in Munich? He sighed. A job. Stability. Maybe some proof that I'm not the screw-up everyone back home thinks I am. Her lips curved faintly. And do you think you have found it? He laughed bitterly. Not today. Perhaps, she said softly, you have found something better. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathan frowned, trying to understand. But before he could ask, She reached for her purse again, touching the ribboned envelope as though to reassure herself it was still there. A storm rumbled outside, louder now, rattling the windows. Nathan felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Something about this woman, the timing, the letter, the way she looked at him, felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place. A piece of a picture he didn't yet know he was part of. If you were Nathan, would you regret missing the appointment? Or would you sense that something bigger was unfolding? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes the smallest choices change everything. The cafe was warm, but Nathan couldn't shake the cold knot in his chest. The cappuccino in Elizabeth's hands had long gone lukewarm, but she still held it delicately, as if savoring its warmth gave her something to cling to. Nathan, on the other hand, had drained his coffee in 3 gulps, leaving nothing but a muddy swirl at the bottom of the cup. His knee bounced under the table. Every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward his watch, though there was no point anymore. 10:47. He was supposed to have been shaking hands by now, convincing someone that he could hold down a real job, that he wasn't just another disappointment. He imagined the empty chair at the cafe across town, the man glancing at his phone, shaking his head, muttering. Knew he wouldn't show up. Nathan pinched the bridge of his nose. He hated that he cared so much about what people thought. Hated that it still felt like his father's voice, even though his father hadn't spoken to him in years. Across the table, Elizabeth watched him quietly, her piercing blue eyes almost too calm. "You're somewhere else," she said softly. He let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, somewhere I was supposed to be half an hour ago." "You regret helping me," she said. Not a question, just a statement. Nathan's head snapped up. "No, he stopped. His throat worked. He wanted to say the right thing, but the truth was tangled. "No," he repeated, slower this time. "I don't regret helping. I wish I could have done both. Been there and here." Elizabeth's gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Finally, she nodded, as though granting him the mercy of silence. But the silence pressed harder than words. Nathan shifted in his chair, restless. His phone buzzed. He snatched it up, hope flaring. Maybe it was the man from the appointment. Maybe there was still a chance. But the screen only read, "Unknown number." He hesitated, then swiped. "Hello." Static crackled, followed by a curt voice. "Mr. Caldwell? This is Herr Wagner's assistant." He waited 20 minutes. "He has another engagement." Nathan's stomach dropped. "Please, can I reschedule? Tell him I got held up. It won't happen again." "I'm sorry," the voice interrupted, cold as steel. "Herr Wagner does not reschedule missed meetings. Good day." The line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, bile rising in his throat. That was it. His chance was gone. All because he'd stopped. He shoved the phone back into his pocket. Too hard, like the force might punish the world instead of himself. Elizabeth's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Bad news." He laughed bitterly. "The worst. Meeting's gone. Doors closed." She tilted her head. "Perhaps the wrong door." "Easy for you to say." The words snapped out sharper than he intended. He regretted them instantly when he saw the faint flicker of hurt in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered, scrubbing a hand over his face. "I didn't mean that." But part of him did. He wanted someone to blame, and she was right here. Elizabeth set her cup down carefully, her hands steady despite the storm flickering in his. "Do you know," she said quietly, "when I was your age, I missed the chance of a lifetime too?" Nathan blinked, caught off guard. "You?" She nodded. Her gaze drifted to the window, where rain streamed down in rivulets, warping the outside world. "It was a role. A film that would have taken me to Hollywood. Everyone said it was my destiny. But I turned it down." "Why?" Nathan asked before he could stop himself. because someone needed me more. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, almost absently, and I thought destiny would wait. Her voice caught just slightly on that last word, and for a moment, Nathan saw something crack in her carefully composed exterior. "What happened?" he asked softly. She smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Life happened." Nathan frowned, wanting to press further, but something in her eyes warned him off. She had given enough, for now. A waiter approached, clearing their cups. "Another round?" Nathan shook his head, but Elizabeth lifted her chin. "Yes, please. Tea this time." The waiter nodded and moved on. Elizabeth turned back to Nathan. "Tell me about this meeting. Why was it so important?" He hesitated. Then the words spilled out, bitter and raw. "Because I needed it to prove I wasn't useless. Because every time I try to build something, it falls apart. Jobs, relationships, family. I screw it up. My dad, he used to say I'd never finish anything. And he was right. I came here to prove him wrong, and now..." He gestured helplessly. "Now I just proved him right again." Elizabeth studied him, her expression unreadable. "Finally," she said, "you are too young to live as though your life is already decided." Nathan snorted. 32 doesn't feel young when you've failed this much. Her eyes softened. "Then you must learn to measure your life differently. Not by what the world keeps from you, but by what you choose to give." The words hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back, staring at her. "Easy for you to say. You're what, wealthy? Dressed like royalty? You've probably never worried about missing rent." The bitterness slipped out before he could catch it. But Elizabeth didn't bristle. She simply regarded him with quiet patience, like a teacher waiting for a stubborn student to catch up. "You assume much," she said finally. "Perhaps too much." The waiter returned with her tea, setting it gently on the table. Elizabeth wrapped her hands around the porcelain cup, though she didn't drink yet. Nathan felt the tension twist tighter inside him. He wanted to storm out, to call this a wasted morning, to reclaim some illusion of control. But something about her kept him rooted. Something about the envelope peeking from her purse, its ribbon faded with age, tugged at his curiosity. He nodded toward it. "What's in there? If it's not too rude to ask." Her fingers brushed the envelope protectively. For the first time, her composure faltered. Just a flicker, but enough. "It is a letter," she said finally. "From a man I once loved. A man who never came back." Nathan's chest tightened. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She nodded once, accepting his sympathy, but offering no more. The resistance between them grew heavy, thick with words unsaid. Nathan wanted to know everything. Who she had loved, what had happened, why she carried the letter now. But she wasn't ready to tell, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. So instead, they sat in silence, the storm outside raging on, two strangers bound by missed chances and a strange, reluctant bond neither of them fully understood. If you were in Nathan's shoes, would you walk away from this mysterious woman and try to chase another opportunity? Or would you stay, even if it meant risking more failure? Comment below. We're curious how you'd choose. The rain had thickened into a steady curtain, washing the city in streaks of grey. Inside the cafe, the fogged windows glowed against the storm, but Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Nathan noticed the subtle wince as she tried to stand. Her hand trembled when she reached for her purse. "Wait," Nathan said, rising quickly. "You shouldn't be walking around with that leg. Let me help you get home." Her expression turned sharp, almost defensive. "I am not an invalid." "I didn't say you were," he countered softly. "But that scrape needs proper care, and..." He glanced at the weather beating against the glass. "And unless you've suddenly developed gills, you're not going far in this storm alone." Elizabeth's lips pressed into a thin line. Pride and gratitude wrestled across her face, but finally she sighed and allowed his arm as he offered it. Outside, the wind shoved at their umbrellas, turning the street into a battlefield of puddles and horns. Nathan guided her carefully toward the gleaming blue sports car that still sat parked by the curb. Its gull-wing doors stood out like defiant wings in the rain. Elizabeth hesitated. "I should not drive in this weather." Nathan blinked. "Wait, this is your car?" Her gaze flicked to him, a glimmer of mischief buried beneath the steel. "Borrowed. But yes. Do you drive?" Yeah. Not cars like this, though." "You will manage," she said, already handing him the keys. He stared at them, stunned. Driving a borrowed sports car, worth more than his life savings through a foreign city, was not exactly how he imagined this morning going. But when Elizabeth slid gingerly into the passenger seat, there was no arguing. With the engine purring like some magnificent beast, Nathan eased the car into traffic. Every raindrop seemed magnified against the windshield. "So," he began cautiously, "where to?" "Elisenstrasse. Near the museum." He nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. For a while, the car was filled only with the growl of the engine and the patter of rain. Nathan tried not to gawk at the dashboard's glowing instruments or the way the leather seats hugged him like a throne. But Elizabeth sat in silence, her hand resting protectively over her purse where the ribboned envelope lay hidden. He cleared his throat. "Look, I didn't mean to snap back there. At the cafe. I'm just not good at sitting with failure." She regarded him from the corner of her eye. "Failure is only failure when you stop moving forward." Nathan gave a half smile. "That sounds like something a teacher would say. Or someone who has failed many times herself." The admission surprised him. Her gaze was on the blurred city lights streaking past, but her voice carried the weight of memory. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was thick, but almost companionable. Two people who had both lost things. One morning, one lifetime. When they reached her building, Nathan nearly forgot to breathe. It wasn't a simple apartment complex, but an old stone residence near Königsplatz, its facade etched with history. The kind of place you imagined housed diplomats or artists who lived in another century. "Here," she said softly. Nathan parked and hurried around to help her out, steadying her against the slick cobblestones. The injury in her leg made her falter again, and she hissed under her breath. "That's it," Nathan said firmly. "I'm not leaving you like this. At least let me make sure you're okay inside." Her eyes narrowed. "You are very persistent. And you're very stubborn," he shot back, though his tone was warm. "So we're even." Inside, the building smelled faintly of waxed wood and old roses. A marble staircase spiraled upward, though thankfully, an elevator waited at the end of the hall. Elizabeth's apartment opened into another world. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows, chandeliers glimmered faintly above, and portraits of performers lined the walls. The air felt alive with echoes of music long past. Nathan froze at the threshold. "This is wow. Clutter," she said briskly, though her eyes softened as she scanned the familiar space. "Sit. I will change and tend my leg." He frowned. "No way. You're letting me help. You have already missed your meeting because of me." "Enough." Nathan crossed his arms. "Then let me at least grab a first aid kit." "Where is it?" Her gaze locked on his, testing him. For a moment, it seemed like she would refuse. But something shifted, and she nodded toward a drawer near the kitchen. Minutes later, Nathan returned with gauze and antiseptic. Elizabeth had eased herself onto a velvet settee, her gown gathered at her side. He crouched again, careful and quiet, cleaning the scrape with gentle hands. She winced once, but otherwise sat as still as a statue. You do this as though you've done it before, she murmured. Used to patch up my kid sister when she crashed her bike. Guess some skills stick. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. But it faded as quickly as it came. Her eyes strayed to the envelope resting on the nearby table, its ribbon damp but intact. Nathan followed her gaze. That letter means a lot, doesn't it? Elizabeth inhaled sharply, then exhaled slowly. It is unfinished business. He wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Instead, he focused on taping the gauze securely. There, he said softly. Good as new. Well, almost. Her hand came to rest briefly on his, warm and frail. Danky. Something in her tone, sincere, stripped of all the regal armor she'd worn outside, stirred in Nathan's chest. He looked around at the apartment again. The photographs of a younger Elizabeth in dazzling gowns, crowds applauding, her name emblazoned across posters. You were famous, he said quietly. Her eyes lingered on a portrait where her younger self held a bouquet of roses under stage lights. Once. Long ago. And now you live here alone? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Her expression turned unreadable. Yes. Alone. Nathan swallowed, guilt biting at him. But the truth of her loneliness hung heavy in the gilded room. A clap of thunder shook the windows, making them both glance up. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Looks like I'm stuck here for a while, Nathan said with a faint, rueful smile. Elizabeth's gaze returned to him, and something softened, almost imperceptibly. Forced proximity indeed. If you were Nathan, would you stay in this grand but lonely apartment with a stranger whose secrets run deep? Or would you walk away, fearing what you might uncover? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The storm refused to relent. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Elizabeth's apartment, the wind moaning through the cracks of the old stone building. The chandeliers above trembled faintly, their crystal droplets catching the occasional flash of lightning. Nathan stood awkwardly near the velvet settee where she sat, his hands shoved into the pockets of his still damp jeans. The first aid kit lay open on the coffee table, gauze and antiseptics scattered across the polished wood. You're sure it's not too tight? He asked, nodding at the bandage around her shin. Elizabeth glanced down, then back up. It is fine. You did well. He nodded, relieved, though the silence that followed felt heavier than before. His eyes wandered over the walls again. Posters, photographs, mementos of a life far removed from his own. A younger Elizabeth gazed out from the frames, luminous and proud, draped in gowns and roses. Nathan's voice broke the quiet. It's strange, you know. Sitting here, looking at these pictures, you don't seem real. Like you stepped out of a history book and somehow ended up bleeding in the rain. Her lips twitched faintly. Do I seem so distant to you? Not distant. He hesitated. Untouchable, maybe. Like you've lived 100 lives already. Her blue eyes lingered on him, sharp and searching. And what about you, Nathan Caldwell? How many lives have you lived? He let out a humorless laugh. One. And not a very impressive one. Tell me. The request was simple, but her gaze carried weight. He sank onto the armchair opposite her, elbows on his knees. My dad ran a hardware store in Illinois, Nathan began, his voice low. The kind of place with shelves stacked higher than your head, the smell of lumber and oil in the air. He worked sunup to sundown, and he expected me to do the same. But he shrugged. I wasn't him. Couldn't be him. Every job I tried, I quit. Every plan I made, I botched. He called me a drifter. Said one day I'd miss the thing that mattered most. Elizabeth tilted her head. And today you think he was right. Today proves he was right. His laugh was bitter. That meeting was my shot, and I blew it. For a long moment, only the rain filled the silence. Then Elizabeth reached for her purse. Her fingers hovered over the ribboned envelope, trembling just slightly before she lifted it into her lap. "You asked about this," she said softly. "Perhaps you deserve to know." Nathan leaned forward, curiosity flaring. She stroked the ribbon with her thumb, her eyes far away. "It is a letter written more than 50 years ago, from a man I loved." Her voice carried both strength and fragility, like a note held too long. Nathan felt the shift in the room, as though the air itself leaned in to listen. "His name was William," she continued, "an American soldier, stationed in Dresden at the end of the war. I was very young, a singer just beginning. My city was in ruins, but when I sang, I could almost forget." Her eyes glistened. "And then came this boy from across the ocean, with a smile too wide and hands too gentle for a soldier. He listened when no one else did. He believed in me." Nathan's chest tightened. "What happened?" "He left." The words were a whisper, raw and unpolished. "Orders. Promises were made. He wrote letters, and I wrote back. But one day, the letters stopped." Her fingers clutched the envelope tighter. "This was the last one. I kept it. Always. Never opened it." Nathan blinked. "You never read it?" "No." Her voice was sharp, defensive. Then softer. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what it might say. That he had found someone else. That he had forgotten me. Or worse, that he still loved me, and I had lost him forever." The storm roared outside, rattling the window panes. Nathan stared at her, struggling to imagine carrying such a weight for decades. "Why now?" he asked gently. "Why carry it today?" Her lips trembled into a faint smile. "Because time runs thin, Nathan. I am 78. I cannot leave this world without knowing." The admission hung in the air like incense. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "William," he repeated softly. "Do you remember his last name?" Elizabeth hesitated, then whispered, "Caldwell." The sound struck Nathan like a blow to the chest. He sat back, heart pounding in his ears. "Elizabeth," his voice cracked. "That's my last name." Her eyes snapped to his, wide and piercing. For a moment, neither of them breathed. "It is not uncommon," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Perhaps coincidence." But Nathan's mind was already racing. His father's stern face flashed before him, the name scrawled across countless bills, signs, and checks, Richard Caldwell. "What if?" Nathan started, then stopped. His mouth was dry. "What if William was my grandfather?" The room seemed to tilt. Elizabeth clutched the letter against her chest, her knuckles white. "Do not say such things lightly," she whispered. "I'm not," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "My dad never talked about his father. Said he walked out when he was young. Nobody knew what happened to him." Elizabeth's hand shook. The envelope, damp and fragile, quivered in her grasp. Her eyes burned with something fierce, desperate. "If this is true," she murmured, "if you are his blood." Her words broke off, choked by emotion. She rose abruptly, limping toward the window, staring out at the storm as though it might carry answers. Nathan followed, his heart racing. "Elizabeth, if that's true, then you're—" "Stop." Her voice cut sharp. She pressed her palm to the cold glass. "Not yet. I cannot, not yet." Nathan froze. He wanted to push, to demand, but something in her posture, rigid, trembling, told him to wait. The storm rumbled on, thunder shaking the old building. In the silence between them, unspoken truths swirled like ghosts. Finally, Elizabeth turned, her face pale but resolute. "You must not speak of this to anyone. Not until I know for certain. Do you understand?" Nathan nodded slowly, though his heart screamed with questions. She set the envelope gently on the table, as though it might shatter. Then she looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, her eyes carried not only mystery, but something achingly familiar. "Perhaps," she whispered, "fate is cruel. Or perhaps it is merciful. We shall see." Backhand index pointing right reflection question and CTA. Middle if you were Elizabeth, would you open the letter after 50 years, knowing it might break your heart? Or would you leave it sealed forever? Tell us in the comments, because some truths are harder to carry than lies. Nathan sat back down, his mind a storm of its own. He had come to Munich for a job, for a chance to prove himself. Instead, he had stumbled into something that felt like destiny, messy and terrifying. Across from him, Elizabeth held herself tall, but her hands trembled against her teacup. The bond between them had shifted. No longer just kindness between strangers, but something deeper, tangled with bloodlines and buried pasts. The stage was set. The truth loomed inevitable. And yet, for now, silence was their only refuge. The storm had dulled into a steady drizzle by the time Nathan realized he was no longer thinking about the missed appointment. Instead, all his attention had narrowed to the room around him. The faint scent of old roses, the golden glow of lamplight against velvet curtains, the way Elizabeth sat across from him, her profile etched with both elegance and exhaustion. The ribboned envelope lay between them on the polished table, as fragile as glass. Neither of them mentioned it again, though its presence weighed heavier than the rain. Nathan shifted in his chair. "You want me to make some tea?" Elizabeth blinked, surprised. "You know how?" He grinned faintly. "I'm 32, not 12. I've burned ramen before, but tea I can handle." Her lips curved in the smallest smile. "Very well." The cupboard above the stove. In her kitchen, Nathan moved carefully, afraid to disturb the neat order of porcelain cups and polished silver spoons. The kettle hissed, filling the air with warmth. He returned minutes later with 2 cups of chamomile, the steam curling upward like whispers. Elizabeth accepted hers gracefully, inhaling the aroma before sipping. Nathan watched her hands, steady now, but thin, veined, fragile. And yet, when she lifted the cup, she did it with the poise of someone who had once commanded stages. "You know," Nathan said, "I never thought I'd spend my morning like this. Playing nurse, driving a fancy car, making tea for a stranger who used to be famous." She chuckled softly. "Life rarely asks for our permission." Her laugh surprised him. It was light, delicate, almost musical. For the first time, he glimpsed not the mysterious old woman with secrets, but simply Elizabeth, the person behind the history. "What about you?" she asked after a pause. "What did you imagine this morning would bring?" He leaned back, exhaling. "A job offer. Proof I could stand on my own 2 feet. Maybe a chance to stop hearing my father's voice in my head. And now," he shrugged, smiling ruefully, "now I'm here. And weirdly, I don't hate it." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, silence said everything. Later, Elizabeth rose and led him into a room lined with shelves of vinyl records and a gleaming old gramophone. "I cannot offer you much," she said, brushing her fingers along the spines of records, "but I can offer music." She selected one, setting the needle down with practiced care. A soft crackle filled the air, followed by the swell of a German aria. The voice that emerged, bright, soaring, achingly young, made Nathan's breath catch. "Is that?" He turned to her. She nodded. "Me. 19 years old." Nathan listened, stunned. The voice seemed too big to belong to the frail woman before him. Yet when he looked at her, he saw the same fire flickering in her eyes. "You were incredible," he whispered. Elizabeth's gaze softened. "I was. Once." Nathan wanted to argue, to tell her she still was, but the words felt clumsy. Instead, he let the music speak. They stood in silence until the aria faded. Elizabeth's hands lingered on the gramophone, trembling slightly. When William left, I sang to survive, to fill the emptiness he left behind. The applause was loud, but it never drowned the silence. Nathan's chest tightened. He wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but he stayed still. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Not chasing after him?" Her eyes glistened. "Every day. But regret is a heavy stone. You cannot carry it forever. You learn to build around it." Her words settled over him like a blanket, heavy but oddly comforting. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Elizabeth shared stories, half humorous, half bittersweet, about concerts in Vienna, mishaps on stage, critics who both adored and despised her. Nathan found himself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in months. In turn, he told her about Chicago, about sneaking onto rooftops as a teenager, about his failed attempt at college. He spoke of his sister, the one person who still believed in him, and the father who never did. "Richard," Elizabeth said softly, tasting the name as though it carried weight. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, Richard Caldwell. Tough as nails. Hard to impress." She looked down quickly, hiding something in her expression. Fathers and sons, they rarely understand each other until it is too late. The sentence landed heavy, almost rehearsed, as if it belonged not only to Nathan's life, but her own. As evening approached, Elizabeth insisted on making supper. Nathan tried to protest, but she waved him into the chair like a general dismissing a soldier. Soon, the small apartment filled with the smell of soup simmering, herbs, onions, something warm and earthy. At the table, over steaming bowls, their conversation slowed. Nathan felt oddly at home, as though he'd stumbled into a memory he didn't know he needed. "You live here alone," he said after a while. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Her spoon paused midair. She didn't answer immediately. "Yes," she said finally. "Lonely and quiet. But sometimes the quiet is easier than the noise of people who do not truly see you." Nathan studied her, hearing more than her words. He thought of his own empty apartment across town, the way silence stretched too wide when no one was there to fill it. "Maybe loneliness isn't about being alone," he said slowly. "Maybe it's about not being understood." Her eyes lifted to his, and for a heartbeat, something passed between them. Understanding. Recognition. The rain outside had stopped by the time Nathan noticed the fatigue etched into her features. "You should rest," he said gently. She shook her head. "Not yet. If I sleep, I will dream. And tonight, I am not ready for dreams." Instead, she moved back to the gramophone, placing another record on. This time a slower piece, piano, gentle and wistful. "Dance with me," she said suddenly. Nathan blinked. "What?" Her smile was faint but real. "Humor me. I have not danced in years." He hesitated, then rose. Taking her hand carefully, he led her into the center of the room. Her steps were small, deliberate, but her grip was strong. The music wrapped around them, and for a few minutes, time seemed suspended. Nathan felt the weight of her frailty, but also the grace still alive in her movements. Elizabeth's eyes shone, not with age, but with memory. When the music faded, she rested her head briefly against his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. His throat tightened. "Anytime." Later, when she finally retired to her room, Nathan remained awake in the sitting room, staring at the ribboned envelope on the table. His mind raced with questions he dared not voice. Was William Caldwell truly his grandfather? Was Elizabeth a stranger, or family? And why did the thought of leaving her tomorrow feel like abandoning something he had only just begun to find? The storm had passed, but inside him, another was just beginning. Night pressed against the old apartment like a heavy curtain, muffling the city outside. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool and damp, But inside Elizabeth's rooms, the silence was thick and uneasy. Nathan sat alone in the sitting room, his gaze locked on the ribboned envelope still resting on the table. Elizabeth had retired hours earlier, yet the letter remained in plain sight, its faded ribbon glowing faintly in the lamplight. His chest tightened every time he looked at it. That single envelope seemed to hold answers to questions he hadn't even dared to form. About William, about his father, about himself. He told himself to leave it be. It wasn't his. It wasn't his right. But the weight of curiosity pressed harder with each tick of the ornate grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, almost against his will, Nathan reached out. His fingers hovered, then closed around the envelope. The paper was fragile, worn thin with age. His heart hammered, as though he were holding a live wire. He didn't mean to open it, only to feel it, to understand what kind of thing could bind a woman's heart for half a century. But as he turned it over, his thumb brushed the seal. It cracked, brittle with age. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet. Nathan. He froze. Elizabeth's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. She stood in the doorway, her nightgown pale against the shadows, her face etched with fury he hadn't thought her capable of. Her blue eyes blazed, sharper than they had been in all their conversations. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Nathan's mouth went dry. I wasn't. You opened it." Her voice trembled, not with age but with rage. "How dare you?" "I didn't mean." He stood quickly, the envelope still in his hands. "Elizabeth, I swear, I wasn't going to read it. I just—" Her voice rose, shattering the quiet. "This letter is all I have left of him. 50 years, Nathan. 50 years I have carried it, protected it, feared it. And you—" Her voice broke. "You had no right." Nathan felt his stomach drop. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought maybe it could help. Maybe it could give us answers." "Answers?" She laughed bitterly, a sound that cut sharper than any accusation. "You think you can waltz into my life, a stranger, and tear open the one wound I have spent my whole life guarding?" Nathan clenched his fists. "I'm not a stranger. Not anymore. You said yourself. William's name was Caldwell. My family's name. Don't you see? We might be connected. We might." "Enough!" she snapped, her voice echoing against the high ceilings. "Do not use my pain to soothe your own failures." The words hit him like a blow. He staggered back, heart pounding. "My failures?" His voice cracked. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to screw up my life so badly that I came crawling into yours, hoping for scraps of meaning?" Elizabeth's hands trembled at her sides. "I think you are lost, and you want to use me, my past, to find yourself. But I am not your compass, Nathan Caldwell. I am not your salvation." Nathan's jaw tightened, anger rising to drown out the sting. "You don't get it. I've been drowning for years. Every time I try to climb out, I fall harder. And now, for once, I thought maybe, just maybe, there was a reason for it. That I was supposed to meet you. That this wasn't just another failure." She turned away, shoulders rigid. Perhaps it was. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nathan stared at her, his chest aching, his hands trembling around the fragile letter. Slowly, carefully, he set it back on the table. His voice was quiet now, but sharp with pain. "You know what my dad always said? That I'd never finish anything. That I'd always walk away. Maybe he was right. Because clearly, I don't belong here either." Elizabeth flinched, but she didn't turn. Nathan grabbed his backpack from the floor. His sneakers squeaked against the polished wood as he crossed the room. At the door he paused, hoping, praying, for her to stop him, to say something, anything. But she stood frozen by the window, her back to him, her shoulders trembling. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the apartment colder than the storm outside. Nathan stumbled into the wet streets, the night air biting his skin. He walked with no direction, his mind a whirlwind of fury and shame. The image of Elizabeth's face, twisted with anger and hurt, replayed over and over. He told himself she was wrong, that she had no right to lash out at him when all he'd done was care. But underneath the anger, guilt gnawed at him. He had opened the letter. He had betrayed the one fragile trust she'd offered. His father's voice returned, cruel and certain. "You'll always fail. You'll always leave things broken." Nathan clenched his fists until his nails bit into his palms. "Not this time," he whispered into the empty street. "Not this time." But the words rang hollow against the night. Back in the apartment, Elizabeth collapsed into the settee, her body trembling. The envelope lay untouched on the table, the seal cracked, its contents still unread. Her hands pressed against her face, tears streaking down her cheeks. For 50 years, she had held that letter, afraid of the truth it carried. And now, in the hands of a stranger who might not be a stranger at all, her secret had cracked open. But it wasn't just the letter. It was Nathan. His eyes, his words, the way he reminded her of William. The same fire, the same stubbornness. And it terrified her, because if he truly was William's grandson, then everything she had buried was rising again, threatening to undo her carefully built life of silence and survival. Elizabeth pressed her trembling hand against the ribbon, her voice breaking in the empty room. "William, what have you left me?" The storm outside was gone, but inside her, the tempest raged on. The city had settled into the thick hush of midnight by the time Nathan realized he had nowhere to go. His sneakers slapped against wet pavement, water soaking through until his toes were numb. Neon signs flickered over shuttered shops, and the smell of rain lingered in the air, metallic and clean. He walked without direction, as though movement itself might erase the memory of Elizabeth's eyes burning with betrayal. But the memory clung to him, sharper than the cold. "You had no right." Her words repeated with each step, a rhythm of accusation. Nathan ducked beneath the awning of a closed bakery, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the damp concrete. He pressed his hands over his face, breath uneven. He had come to Munich chasing a chance. Instead, he had destroyed the one fragile connection that had felt real in years. His father's voice was louder now, cruel and certain. "You'll never finish anything. You'll always walk away." Nathan's fists clenched in his lap. "I didn't walk away," he muttered. "She pushed me out." But even as the words left his mouth, guilt bit deeper. Because he had touched the letter. He had broken the seal. And maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't looking for her sake, but his own. Maybe he had been desperate to stitch meaning into his broken life, using her pain as thread. Nathan tilted his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. The rain drummed softly on the awning above, steady, relentless. He thought of Elizabeth's hand resting on his while he'd wrapped her wound, of her laugh when he'd burned the tea kettle slightly, of the way she had leaned against him when they danced. She wasn't just a stranger, and now he had lost her. In her apartment, Elizabeth sat alone in the dim lamplight, the letter clutched in her lap. The cracked seal gaped like a wound, but she hadn't yet pulled out the paper inside. Her hands trembled as she traced the ribbon, memories flooding back. William's smile, his American accent tangled with broken German, the way he had listened when she sang. She had kept this letter for 50 years, afraid of the truth it carried. But tonight, another truth had shaken her more, Nathan. The way he had looked at her, desperate and sincere. The way his words had echoed William's stubborn fire. Even his failures, his shame, they had felt familiar. Elizabeth pressed her eyes shut, whispering into the quiet. If he is William's blood, why now? Why after all these years? Her chest ached. She had driven him away with her anger, but beneath that anger was fear. If Nathan truly was William's grandson, then the life she had buried was clawing its way back into the present. And she didn't know if her heart could bear it. She looked down at the letter again. She could open it now. She could know, finally, what William had written. But the thought terrified her more than the silence. With trembling hands, she set it back on the table and rose. The apartment felt cavernous, each room echoing with emptiness. For years she had told herself she was content with solitude, that the silence was safer than companionship. But now, after a single day with Nathan, the silence felt unbearable. She pressed her palms against the window, staring down at the glistening streets. Somewhere out there, he was walking alone, and she wondered if she had driven away the last chance life had given her to be seen. Nathan found himself at the river without remembering how he'd gotten there. The water rushed dark and endless, reflecting the faint glow of street lamps. He leaned against the railing, staring into the current. He thought of calling his sister back in Chicago, but what would he say? That he'd ruined another chance? That he'd met a woman who might hold the key to their family's past, and he'd destroyed it by being impatient? The knot in his chest tightened until his eyes burned. He was tired of failing, tired of drifting, tired of proving his father right. But beneath the exhaustion was a flicker, faint but steady, the memory of Elizabeth's words in the cafe. Perhaps you have found something better. Maybe she was right. Maybe the meeting he'd missed had never mattered. Maybe this strange, impossible connection was what mattered. But if that was true, then he couldn't leave it broken. He turned from the river, his steps uncertain but resolute. Elizabeth sat at her vanity, brushing her silver hair slowly, each stroke steadying her. In the mirror, she caught her own eyes and almost didn't recognize them. Wet with tears, rimmed with exhaustion. "You were cruel," she whispered to herself. "You punished him for touching a wound he could not understand." She set the brush down and pressed her palms flat on the vanity. She had lived a lifetime building walls, protecting the most fragile part of herself. But Nathan had slipped through those walls with his stubborn kindness, and for a brief moment, she had felt less alone. She wanted that feeling back. But the risk terrified her. What if he truly was William's grandson? What if he blamed her for the life William had abandoned? Or worse, what if he wanted more from her than she could give? The questions coiled inside her, but beneath them was a simpler truth. She didn't want him gone. Elizabeth rose, her steps slow but determined. She moved back to the sitting room, where the envelope still lay waiting. She touched it once more, then set it aside. Tonight was not the night for the letter. Tonight was the night to choose whether to remain alone, or to reach out. Nathan returned to her street, as dawn painted the sky pale grey. He hesitated at the base of the stone building, soaked to the bone, staring up at her window. He could walk away, pretend this had never happened, let her keep her secrets, and let him remain the drifter his father always said he was. Or he could climb those steps, knock on her door, and risk being rejected again. His chest tightened. The choice was his. Inside, Elizabeth sat by the window, the city slowly stirring awake beneath her. She sipped cold tea, her eyes fixed on the street below. And then she saw him, Nathan, standing in the rain, staring up at her window like a man deciding whether to leap. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the cup. She could close the curtain, retreat back into the safety of silence. Or she could rise, unlock the door, and let him in. Her chest ached with the weight of the choice. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly she stood. The sound of the lock turning echoed through the quiet apartment, louder than thunder. The knock at the door was soft, almost hesitant. Elizabeth's heart jolted. She froze in the entryway, her hand hovering over the knob. For a moment she considered retreating, pretending she hadn't heard it. But the sound came again, 3 firm raps, steady, resolute. With a breath that trembled in her chest, she opened the door. Nathan stood there, drenched from head to toe, hair plastered against his forehead, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Yet when he met her gaze, something steady burned beneath the weariness. "Elizabeth," he said softly. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she stepped aside. Wordlessly, he entered. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the drip of rainwater from Nathan's jacket onto the polished floor. "I shouldn't have touched the letter," Nathan began, his voice low, rough. "You were right. I crossed a line. He swallowed hard. "I didn't know what else to do. It felt like everything, your past, my past, was tied up in that envelope. And I needed to know." Elizabeth closed the door gently. Her back remained to him as she spoke. "And what if you had read it, Nathan? What if it told you something you did not want to hear?" His jaw clenched. At least it would have been the truth. Better than living in the dark, doubting everything. She turned slowly, her blue eyes glistening. "And if the truth breaks you?" Nathan let out a shaky laugh. "Then maybe it's the only thing strong enough to put me back together." For a long moment, silence held them. Then Elizabeth crossed the room, her steps deliberate despite the limp in her gait. She stopped before the table where the envelope still lay. Her fingers hovered, then settled on it. She lifted it carefully, as though it might crumble to dust, and looked at Nathan. "Then we read it together," she whispered. Nathan's breath caught. He stepped closer, heart pounding. Elizabeth slipped her nail beneath the cracked seal and pulled the faded paper free. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, the handwriting sprawling across the yellowed page in dark ink. Her lips trembled as she began to read aloud. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, I fear I have failed to return to you. Orders are strict, and they speak of redeployment. My heart aches, knowing I may leave you waiting. But know this, my love for you was no passing thing. It was real. You gave me music when all I knew was war. You gave me hope when I thought myself lost. I wanted to build a life with you, if only the world would allow it. If I cannot come back, then I leave this truth with you. You are my family, my heart. And though miles and years may separate us, a part of me will always remain with you. Forgive me if I fail you. Remember me not as a soldier, but as the man who loved you under the broken sky. Yours always, William Caldwell." Elizabeth's voice broke on the last word. The letter slipped from her trembling hands onto the table. Tears streaked her cheeks as she covered her face. Nathan stood frozen, the words echoing in his chest like a drumbeat. William Caldwell, the man who had disappeared from his father's life. The man his father had only ever spoken of as an absence. Nathan bent, lifting the letter gently. His fingers traced the ink, as though it might connect him across time. "He loved you," he whispered. "He didn't abandon you. Or us. He was taken by the war." Elizabeth lowered her hands, her eyes wet but fierce. "For 50 years, I carried the weight of not knowing. And all this time, the truth was here. In his words." Her gaze locked with Nathan's. "And now you. His blood. His grandson." Nathan's throat tightened. He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. A sob shook through him, part grief, part release. "All my life," he said hoarsely, "I thought I was just broken. That my father was right, that I'd never amount to anything. But maybe it wasn't just me. Maybe we were all carrying his absence, bleeding from a wound we couldn't name." Elizabeth reached across the table, her frail hand covering his. "And now you know. He loved. He did not abandon. The blood you carry is not failure. It is love." Nathan looked up, tears blurring his vision. "You don't know what that means to me." Her lips curved in a sad, tender smile. "I think I do." The dawn light crept into the apartment, soft and golden, painting the velvet curtains and the silver strands of Elizabeth's hair. Nathan and Elizabeth sat together, the letter between them, the silence now warm rather than heavy. For the first time, Nathan felt a strange peace in his chest, as though the ache that had haunted him his whole life had been named, understood, and finally soothed. "You've carried this alone for so long," he said gently. "You don't have to anymore." Elizabeth's hand squeezed his. "And you, Nathan, you no longer walk alone in your failure. You walk with family. With me." The word struck him harder than any lecture his father had ever given. Family. For the first time, he felt worthy of it. Hours later, as they shared breakfast, simple bread and jam, Elizabeth chuckled softly. "What is it?" Nathan asked. She shook her head, amused. "I was thinking, the world is strange. I spent a lifetime waiting for William to return. And in a way, he has. Through you." Nathan smiled faintly, the weight in his chest lifting. "Guess I didn't miss the appointment that mattered after all." Her eyes twinkled, sharp even through tears. "No, you did not." As the day brightened, Nathan knew life would not suddenly be easy. His father was still miles away, their relationship still fractured. But now he carried something powerful. Proof of love, proof of belonging, proof that he was not the broken link in a chain, but part of a story bigger than himself. Elizabeth, too, felt the weight of decades lighten. The letter no longer haunted her, it freed her. And Nathan's presence filled the apartment with something she had thought forever lost. The warmth of family, of being seen, of not being alone. If you discovered a hidden letter that revealed a secret about your family's past, would you read it? Even if it might change everything you thought you knew? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the truths we fear are the ones that set us free. And friends, before you leave, don't just drift away like shadows. You've walked through every storm with us, and stories like this deserve a place in your heart. Subscribe now, not tomorrow, because tomorrow is never promised, but connection is here today.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you would surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.